Hi, I'm Amy, Head of Learning and Development and Support at Rachel.
We are sitting our very exciting studio so that you can see us and see that we are real people, even though you just met AI Amy. But today we're going to be talking about a very important topic, which is around the KPIs. And, which is something we should all be benchmarking ourselves against. KPIs being, hold on for me 1 second.
Is that distracting?
There's a slight
Give me 1
echo there,
second.
guys. I don't know where it comes
We're
from.
going to turn it off now. Okay, it should be gone. Yep,
Okay,
continue.
there we go. Can you still hear us?
Perfect. No, now it's perfect. I can hear you. And no echo.
You can hear it. Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, so let's begin with that. So we're going to be discussing the KPIs, and KPIs are key performance indicators, which means what are we measuring ourselves against? And these are normally things that your company should be measuring you against as well, to say, how do you quantify that you're doing a great job? And how do you make sure that you're being measured against that so that you can also improve yourself? So it's not just a measurement of, am I doing a great job because I feel like it, or am I actually on paper doing a great job? And so that is where KPIs come in, but it also gives us an indication of what the benchmarking is. So if we look at what successful companies are doing, we should be benchmarking ourselves against those businesses to say they're doing certain things that we should be doing. And if we're doing these things, then we should be in that top benchmark as well. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So let's jump right into that presentation so that we can begin. Okay. So first and foremost, we're going to just talk about what we're going to cover today, and some of these things we've actually spoken about before, but I'm hoping that you see how these all tie into each other and how we're bringing the sessions together. But let's walk us through it. So first and foremost, we're looking at DSOs, which is the daily sales outstanding, and this is how the aging analysis fits into the bigger picture. Then we're going to unpack the collections effectiveness. So we're going to use that effectiveness index, or the CEI, which is what that acronym stands for, which metric has, there's a lot of different teams that this works around that we need to know how it, why it exists and why and where do we use this. And then we're going to look at the overdue percentage as a early warning signal, and specifically why that trend matters, far more than the number itself. So it's what's happening in our world, and then the best possible DSOs that we should be having. So let's jump right into that. Okay. So the framework that underpins everything else that we're going to cover today, the credit cycle has 3 broad stages. So there's the onboarding, there's the active account management, and then there's the collections. And these 3 things are what we're going to use to measure each of our stages. And that should reflect what decision you're trying to make before you get to the individual KPIs. So what is the team overall goal? And some companies call them OKRs, OKRs being objectives and key results. And then I want you to have, this framework in mind when we go through everything, because it's key to understanding why one metric is more useful than another at different points in the relationship. So what we've got here is the credit cycle at a glance, okay? And this is the journey of your customer, and every stage has a different question. So in other words, that, you're going to have different questions that you need to answer. So at the onboarding stage, the question is, should I extend credit to this customer? And if so, how much should it be? At this stage, the metrics that you care about are upfront assessment tools, so things like credit scores, recommended limits, payment history. From the other suppliers, maybe you still use trade references. And so you're going to be making the yes or no decision before the money has even changed hands. So that's the part of the onboarding process. Once the account is then active, so in other words, they're starting to trade with you, the question shifts now to what you should be asking yourself, which is this account healthy? Are the invoices being paid on time? Is the balance growing in a way that feels managed or in a way that the account feels, concerning? This is where your DSO trend and your aging buckets are the best of friends, okay? So because they tell you about the direction and the speed and not just the current position. Okay, so that's the number 2. And then we get to the collection. So the question becomes, how effective is my team, okay, at recovering what we're owed? That is where your CEI and your promise to pay rate becomes critical. You already have extended the credit. You've already sent out your invoices. Now you need to know whether or not your team is converting outstanding invoice balances into actual cash, which of course cash is king. And what we often see in practice in teams applying all these collections mindset of an active account is that we're not chasing aggressively when, if we're gently monitoring an account, we're going to have to be chasing aggressively. But if we're more proactive, then the chasing of the accounts should be lower and that everything should be streamlined, and we should be more on the active account monitoring approach and not chasing overdue debt all the time. So the framework that we're laying out today is designed to help us apply the right metric at the right stage. So keeping the 3-stage model in mind when we're looking at each KPI. Okay. So here's a point that, we come back to, Neil and I and Martin and I, we talk about this again and again in our different sessions, and the same KPI keeps, coming up, something that is very different depending on who you're looking at and why. So take the DSO, for example. If you're a credit manager, a DSO tells you whether your collection process is working. Okay, and it's an operational signal. So if DSO is creeping up, you look at your aging report, you identify different accounts that are dragging that number down, or should I say dragging that number up, not down, and you prioritize your team's calls accordingly. So that just gives us a different view of what the team is doing and what their processes look like. But if you were a CFO, DSO tells us something completely different. It tells us how much cash is sitting in our debtors ledger, waiting to come in. And every extra day on a DSO has a cost, which is what we spoke about in one of our previous sessions. And either in the cost of borrowing to fund the operation, meaning our own business while you wait, or the opportunity of cost of capital that is sitting idle. So in other words, that interest that we're missing out on, and the reinvestment that we're missing out on. So the CFO is looking at something completely different to what the credit manager is looking at. Neither perspective is wrong. They're both correct. They're just asking very different questions about the same number. So what we want to build today is the shared language between these two different seats at the table. What a credit manager, sorry, let me just, somebody trying to call. So what a credit manager says is our CEO has dropped to 68%. Okay, so the CFO should understand exactly what that means for the cash position of the business, not just okay, cool, and then move on. And when a CFO says, I need your DSOs below 42 days by the end of this quarter, the credit manager should know what levels and or what levers to pull in order to make that happen. So KPIs that we covered today speak about both perspectives, and making sure that we're working towards the same goal, which is where we are headed. Okay, so before we get into the individual metrics, I want to show you something that grounds all of this a little bit together. Okay, and that's making it a little bit more real for what we do on a day-to-day basis, because KPIs does not come from a textbook, and it's not a set thing that everyone is going to have exactly the same all the time. So we've pulled them from different directions of actual credit controller roles that have been specified, and or a national credit manager, of professional services, a credit controller role across multiple different industries. So we went to look and see, if you were to apply for these roles, what are the expectations that they're expecting these people to be able to have. So we went to have a look at this data, and to put these 3 columns side by side are differences that would jump out immediately. So first and foremost, a credit controller is measured on daily activity. So how many calls are you making? How many promises are you securing? How much is collected against your target? Their world is very transactional, very high frequency. They are on the front line, making contact, logging promises, escalating difficult conversations. So that is where their measurement comes in. A credit manager is a level above that. They're not looking at making the individual calls, but they're reading the portfolios, the DSO of a controller, the CEI of a team, which accounts are migrating to a higher risk, and or moving into aging buckets that are beyond their terms. Their job is to see the patterns, to see what's happening, that no single controller can see from inside their own portfolio, because you're not looking at, you're only looking at what you have been allocated, whereas they're looking to see what patterns are we seeing across the debtors book, across all of our our credit controllers, so that the patterns can then direct the team's efforts as well. And that's hopefully where they're going to make the most impact. A CEO or a CFO, is looking for something totally different again. So they're looking at total daily receipts. So they're looking at the totals. They're looking at the working capital. They're looking at the rand value of the best possible DSO gap. So they're looking at impairment charges. They're looking at the number that, they need to go to the board with, to the investors with, to the bankers with. So they're looking at those numbers, at what am I going to go and tell them? So they don't need to know whether or not a specific account is in 60 days. They need to know whether or not the overall cash position is on track, and whether or not their provisioning is adequate enough. So provisioning for bad debt. Okay. So the reason that one KPI cannot serve all 3 roles is that it's exactly what we're mapping out here today, is that the right metric for the right position or the right stage within the cycle. Okay. I'm excited to see that Neil is nodding along with me. It's making me so happy. Okay, so then moving on to part 2, and this is getting into the more specifics, the aging analysis, the DSOs, the 2 metrics that most credit teams are already tracking, hopefully, but are always in the right, are not always in the right way that we're tracking it, or it's not always at the right stage that we're looking at this. So let's jump into both of those. Okay. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. And Neil was very sweet this week, because last week, if you forgot, I didn't make tea, and this week I did, and so did he. So we have 2 cups of tea going on here. Okay, so let's start with the formula for a DSO. And if you remember from our previous session, your daily sales outstanding is your total trade receivables that's divided by your total credit sales multiplied by the number of days in the period. So I know that looks like a lot, but you can see the formula up at the top there. And what that gives you is the average number of days it takes a business to collect in, on a credit sale. So how long is this money outstanding before the cash comes into my bank on average? Okay, so if your DSO is 45 days, that means that on average, a customer takes 45 days to pay you. So once you've raised your invoice, or once you've raised your statement, okay? So if your standard payment terms are 30 days, you can immediately see that there is a 15-day gap between when you expect to be paid and when you're actually getting paid. So now this is where the 2 personas that we've talked about earlier come and see the numbers so very differently. As a credit manager, a DSO is the team's performance indicator. Okay, so if a DSO is going up, your collection process has a problem somewhere. So it is your job as the credit manager to then go and find out why, go find it, go find that problem. Is it concentrated in a few large accounts who are slow payers? Is it spread across the book that we need to look at? And which, this might point out a process issue rather than specific account problems. It could be a credit controller problem. It could be a soft skills problem. And this is something that is really difficult to manage in terms of a KPI. You know, what is your telephone skills looking like as a credit controller? Are you effective when you pick up the phone? Do you pick up the phone? Or are you what I refer to as a email warrior, where you pop over an email, you get that sense of dopamine injection where you feel like you've actually done something, but you've completely missed the mark. You know, still people buy from people, and we say that all the time within our business, that, you know, there is that level of personal relationship that we need to foster. So sometimes your collection strategies is that the person on, you know, in your team is the email warrior. So technically, did they get something in their tick list? Absolutely. Are they actually effective? Unfortunately not. So we want to be looking at those different soft skills as well, and not just necessarily whether or not the numbers are telling us a story. They're telling us which direction to look at. So DSO gives you the flag, the aging report gives you the detail. Okay, so that's what we're looking at here. Then we want to look as a CFO, a DSO is working capital story. Okay, so that's what they see it as. The calculation that we've shared earlier, this is one of my favorites because it takes your monthly revenue meaning how much money comes into your business, and divides it by 30. And that gives you the rand value of 1 day's worth of sales. Okay, and why is this important? Because for every extra day on a DSO is the amount sitting in someone else's bank account instead of in your bank account. So when you frame it that way, you know, a 5-day increase in DSO stops feeling like a collections team's, you know, statics and statistics, and, you know, it starts feeling more like a finance problem, because now you can allocate how much money did we actually lose on 1 day of that being not in our bank account. So you can see why that looks very different and how that speaks to each team member's goals for the business. Okay, and how if one person is laxy-daisy in their area, how does that affect the bigger picture as well? So the key point here is that DSO on its own is very useful, but it is a blunt instrument. It tells you something is going on. It doesn't tell you exactly what, and it doesn't tell you where. That is what the aging analysis is for. It gives you that detail that we spoke about. I'm guessing that there's no questions in the comment section, and or if because I'm looking at a different screen to you, you tell me as well, Martin, when you want to jump in there as well. Okay, as Martin said, I do like to talk.
You're doing an exceptional job up to now, so I've got no questions, and there's no other questions, and there is nothing that I would like to add.
And no hands. Okay, perfect. So now let's look at how the DSO changes meaning depending on where you are in the cycle. So if you remember back to the first slide, we spoke about the onboarding, the active, and then the collection cycles. That's what we're referring to here. But because something, you know, I want to lock this in, and so that we can really make a point of it here, is that at onboarding, DSO is not something you calculate on a new customer. Why? Because there's nothing outstanding. You haven't done anything yet. So they have not bought anything yet, but you should be using industry DSO benchmarks to set your payment terms intelligently. So when you're going to onboard a customer and they ask you how long, you know, what terms are you going to give them, that's when you really need to be thinking about how long can we actually live without the money in our bank account. So if you cannot survive without your money for 60 days, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, don't offer 30-day terms. So you need to make sure that you're looking at that. So if you're selling in like the construction industry, for example, and the average DSO in that industry or that sector is 52 days, setting 32-day terms on every account and then being surprised when nobody pays in 30 days is going to cause a lot of unnecessary stress. So understanding the norm also helps you set realistic expectations upfront for yourself as well as for the customer. And we do see that often, you know, when you're in a specific industry or you're dealing with very large companies whose literal payment terms, and when I say literal payment terms, I mean that once that invoice reaches the right department and then it gets to treasury, how long does that process take? And so we don't want to set anybody up for failure, but we also want to make sure that we're covering our bases. And if longer terms are required, then we need to take that into consideration in our pricing as well. So when we're calculating that, we need to say, right, if we're going to sell on these terms, how much is it going to cost my business? And how much am I going to sell my product or my service at to make sure that I'm covering my bases? Okay, and of course, we're all here to make profit as well and grow our own business. What you do with that profit is up to you, but whether you're reinvesting or you're spending, that's up to you. We just want to make sure that we have options. Okay, so then we move into the active account management stage. So DSO becomes a trend metric here. So you're not just looking at what number is it today, you're asking, is it moving in the right direction? Okay, so obviously we want it to be going down, not up. Okay, so the 3 consecutive monthly increases in a customer's DSO is one of the clearest early warning signs that you can get. How does this customer trade with me? Okay, and that's obviously in your debtors aging, and you can have a look at that on a regular basis. And it tells you that the payments are slowing down. And the slowing of payments almost always precedes late payments, or late payments precede non-payment. And if you want to intervene at the payment slowing stage, not the payment stopped stage. So you want to be more proactive. So this is the best indicator to say, something is going on. There are some other indicators that we see, not just only like slower payments, but paying in round amounts, paying the amount that we did not allocate, only paying some of the invoices on a statement. This could be an indication of cash flow issues on your customer side. And this is the story that it's telling us. Okay. So at the collection stage, if DSOs are spiking, it's not a trend that we need to be watching. It's a trigger to be acting. So we're not watching anymore. We're now jumping at it. So the cross-reference this immediately with your aging report. And if your DSO has jumped and their aging shows balances that are migrating from 30 to 60 days, from 60 days to 90 days in a very short space of time, you're going to have a problem. And that is going to escalate up the chain. So now we're going to be looking at things like provision for bad debts. We're going to want to make sure that we're, being in touch with our customer, not being an email warrior, looking at what promises have been made and following up from that perspective and deciding whether or not we still want to trade with this customer going forward. Maybe we want to put in a stop to say, we'll trade with you on COD, or we don't want to trade with you at all. So the principle is simple. The same number, very different urgencies depending on the stage. So some are just saying, okay, we should take notice of our DSOs. Others are saying we need to act right now so that we don't land up with writing off bad debt. And again, chasing our tails as well. So let's have a look at reading this aging report. And of course, it's just a mock-up of an aging report. Hopefully yours is as colorful as mine. Okay, so the aging report, in my opinion, is one of the most underused tools in credit management. Most teams, they run it, but not everybody is actually reading it the way it was designed to be read and interpreting it the way it's designed to be interpreted. So your aging report, it groups every outstanding invoice by its overdue. Okay, so which bucket does it belong to? And the buckets that you're looking at here are the standard ones that we get. So we've got current, we've got 30 days, we've got 60 days, we've got 61 to 90 days, 90 days and above. But you may have different terms such as 7 days, I've seen 3 days, and obviously those will roll according to the aging of that bucket. In other words, if you offer 3-day terms, then you'll have 3, 6, 9, 12. If you offer 7, it will be 7, 14, 21, 28. And then, of course, you then would also look at whether you offer from statement and or from invoice, because that will make a difference in terms of that aging as well. So just to clarify, invoices that are 30 days from invoice, meaning you buy from me today on the 2nd of July, I'm going to invoice you. Your invoice is due on the 2nd of August. So that is 30 days from the day that I give you that invoice. 30 days from statement means that you can purchase throughout the whole month, and at the end of the month, I'm going to send you a statement. Now, if you bought from me on the 2nd of July, I invoice you on the 31st are there 30 or 31 days in July? 30th of July. Is there 31? Okay, you got to do the little knuckle thing. And, you know, so now you've bought from me on the 1st of July. I invoice you on the 31st of July. That statement that has gone out then says you only need to pay me now on the 30th of August. So if I count the day from the day you purchased the first thing to the day you're actually going to pay me, that's 60 days. Okay, and there may be multiple invoices in that process. So very important to understand the difference between the two and how long you're going to be sitting without that money in your bank account. Okay, so that's just a little breakdown of what that is. So each bucket tells you something different and it demands different responses as well. So there is also something that I didn't add on here, which is a bucket that some people use if you offer longer terms than 30 days, which is called future due. It's not something that everybody uses. It's only if you really offer, you know, 90-day terms, 120-day terms, that it is meaning it's not going to sit in the current bucket. And or some people use the current bucket in that way as well, and then it only becomes overdue once it is overdue. So that's up to your business on how you like to use your different buckets, but most start with current, which means that the invoice is not due yet, but as you know, it's business as usual and no action is required from you today. So on 30 days, this is where your courtesy calls live. Okay, so this is not just your emergency. It's not an emergency yet, but it's the moment you pick up the phone, you confirm that the invoice was received. I would actually recommend that you do this before that. Where I would see this is that, I'm just replaying this in my mind, that once you send your statement and your invoice, within the first 5 days, you should be picking up the phone to say, I just want to confirm that you A, received it, B, that everything on it is correct. I submitted it in the correct way. Maybe you use a portal and maybe you've got purchase orders. I want to make sure that I, as the credit controller, have not given you any reason not to pay me. So within the first, I would say the first week of sending out your statements, there should be a follow-up. So then comes the next, you know, if we start seeing that it's now reaching the 30-day period and we haven't received anything, we're going to pick up the phone again and we're going to say, no, Mr. Customer, everything that we did was correct. Can you confirm when we're going to get paid? Okay, and you know, or understanding your customer, and I know Martin speaks about this all the time, KYC, know your customer, which means understand everything about them. And so once it starts reaching that 30-day bucket, we need to make sure that we're getting those promises to pay, you know, when is it going to be expected? And then you're removing the excuses before they become the reasons. Okay, so you want to make sure that we're on top of it. The 31 to 60 days overdue, this is your follow-up, you know, so you need to be very assertive. You need to know that this needs to be escalated within your own team and or even within your customer's team, because this is where we're now starting to see that gap grow. And the bigger the gap grows, the less likely we are to collect those funds. Okay. The 61 to 90-day buckets, and I say 61 because it can be on the 60th day that you're overdue, the 61st day, 62nd, 63rd, all the way up until 90 days. Okay, so just so that you can see what that aging period looks like, or that gap, if you want to call it. So 61 to 90 days is seriously late. Okay, at this point, you're thinking about account suspension, you know, no new orders until outstanding balances have been resolved. A senior person in your team or a manager should be involved as well in the conversations with your customer. So you're needing to now say, we're actually not going to put ourselves into further issues until something has been resolved. And or this all needs to live inside your credit policy to say that we know when to have a stop order, and that can live at 60 days. If you're now 60 days overdue, sorry for you, so we're stopping your purchasing until you pay us. That's up to your business. And of course, you can also look at the values as well. So that can be, you know, if somebody's in 90 days and it's 1,000 Rand and 1,000 Rand to your business is not even a drop in the ocean, that's one thing. If we're talking about 100,000 Rand, 1 million Rand, 10 million Rand, you know, numbers also make a difference. Okay. So in the 90 days and above, this is a very high risk bucket. So in most organizations, this is the threshold of referring to like external collections or legal that we're going to be handing you over. So once debt is now here, the recovery rate has dropped significantly, and there is also other costs involved as well. So we're not just talking about costs that we've already incurred, that what our CFO cares about in terms of those DSOs and the daily amount we're losing. We're not even talking about, the interest lost or interest paid that we're losing. We're not talking about, how much we had encountered or banked on. In other words, when we calculate how much to sell something at, we go and say, how much does it cost my business to run for 30 days? How much does it cost me in salaries? How much does it cost me for my product? And that is what a 30-day pricing should look like. Now we're getting to the point that, yes, we've already incurred all these additional costs as well as the outstanding value. And now we're going to be looking at collection costs as well. So now we need to start looking at, well, do we want to write this off as bad debt? Because it isn't even worth our while to go to a lawyer or an external collections company because we're not going to recover. It's going to cost us even more. So that's when we need to start looking at, do we hand it over and is there an external thing here? And once the debt is here, we know that the recovery rate is going to be low. And or if you are credit insured, then this is also when we are, hopefully we've included our credit insurer beforehand so that they're aware of it, but we may then want to decide whether or not we're going to process a claim. But here is the thing that I really want you to take away from this slide, is that the aging report is not just about the current bucket. It's about the movement between the buckets. So a customer who was in current last month and is now in 30 days and then to 60 days, and they've migrated 2 buckets in 1 month, then that is much more alarming as a signal that a customer who's been sitting in 30 to 60 days, consistently for a year. So the velocity of the movement tells us something in that bucket, has changed. And if we have a customer that constantly pays us late, but they do pay us, versus a customer who used to pay us always on time and now is slowly but surely starting to regress. So that's where we're looking at those 2 things. Okay, so part 3. So the best possible DSO is the metric that separates the teams, that measures, that are measuring the teams that are truly managing all of this. So let me show you what this looks like. And I know, Martin, you are so good at this, the DSOs and taking somebody's DSO. So anyone who wants some advice, how to bring your DSOs down, I'm offering Martin here, like a lamb to the slaughter, on what's the best practice to help bring this down. Because the best possible DSO is one of those metrics that makes people stop and think, when they first encounter it, what should we do? And then wonder, how they ever managed without it once they start using the proper DSO calculation. Okay, so this is a lot of acronyms over here, the BPDSO, the best possible DSO. And I know, Martin, you would say that if you offer 30-day terms, the best possible DSO is 30 days. Or 0 days. Did I get that wrong? It's 0 days. 27 days where they pay early. I love it. Okay. So the core idea here is your actual DSO includes the entire debtors book. So invoices that are not yet due, as well as the ones that are overdue. So the best possible DSO strips out everything that is overdue and it looks at everything together. If you only calculate DSO from 30 days onwards, you're not going to know if there is actually a problem. You're only focusing on overdue accounts versus how long does it take my entire debtors book to pay me on average. Okay, so it uses your current, your not yet due receivables as well. So that gives us the DSO that you would have had if every single overdue account was paid today. So if everybody paid right now, what would that look like? So think about what this tells you. So if your best possible DSO is 30 days and your actual DSO is 48 days, that 18-day gap is not caused by the customers, but are, who are legitimately within their payment terms. The gap exists entirely because of overdue accounts. And this is avoidable, it's measurable, it's quantifiable, in terms of inefficiencies in your collections process. And that's what it's going to tell us. And as for a CFO's perspective, which I'm sure that Martin can speak about from personal experiences, that gap is cash. It's real cash. So if your average daily revenue is 300,000 Rand and your BPDSO gap is 8 days, you have approximately 2.4 million Rand sitting in overdue debtors that should be sitting in your bank account. And I don't know about you, but I would rather have that money in my bank account than sitting, in somebody else's bank account, like I said earlier, and or worse, not going to be received at all. So now your best possible DSO will never reach 0. I say never, but I also like to say never, so you never know. There will always be some current receivables, and it's unless you trade in cash only, of course. And it should not be your target to eliminate the gap entirely, but by monitoring the trend of the gap over time tells you whether your collections process is improving or deteriorating. And obviously a shrinking gap means that your team is getting more effective, which is what we want. And widening the gap means that there's something is going very wrong, and you need to find out what that gap is and where it's going wrong.
Yeah, and one thing about this BP,
Yes.
this possible DSO is this: is if you understand what it is and you have ring-fenced the accounts that is causing that difference between your best possible and your actual, then you can start focusing attention or get a team to focus their attention. Is it our administration that is going wrong? In other words, is it internal? Is it that we don't have the purchase orders, that we don't get delivery notes, that the invoices are not going out on time? What is the problem internally? Or is it an external problem that the client's processes are too long, or worst case, that the clients don't have money to pay? What do we do to curtail that, to get them out of our system, and to bring that best possible DSO and your actual DSO closer to one another?
Absolutely. Thanks, Martin. So this chart tells us that something that every CFO, hopefully I'm not a CFO, so hopefully every other CFO and every credit manager should be able to read immediately. So the cyan blue, and I know my kids love this color, cyan, is the best possible DSO. They have been flat and even slightly improving over the last 6-month period, sitting in the low 30s. So that tells us that when invoices are current, the business is billing effectively, and that credit teams are, the credit terms are appropriate to what we've given them. So that's important. The pink bars tell us the actual DSOs. So they're, and they're climbing. So January to June, actual DSOs went from 45 days to 55 days. A 30-day increase in 6 months. And here is where the critical observation comes in, is that the best possible DSO barely moved. So the gap that existed in January, about 11 days that we're looking at here, has grown to 26 days by June. Okay, so the gap of the 26 days is not caused by your payment terms being too long. It's caused by the customers who are legitimately within their terms. It's caused entirely by overdue accounts, and that is, things that are not being collected. So that a collections process is the issue, and that is what is quantifiable here. So in a hypothetical, business that has monthly revenue of 5 million Rand, each day of DSO represents 170,000 Rand. So that is a 26-day gap, is more than 4 million Rand sitting in your debtors book that should have been converted into cash in your bank. So when you frame your best possible DSO's gap in those terms, in rands and not days, it stops being a credit department statistic and start becoming a board level conversation. And so even though if you are a credit controller or you are a credit manager, if you're thinking along the lines of the rand value, which is what your CFO wants you to be thinking about, then you're going to be upping your game. Okay, so when you're feeling that 1 rand, that 1 million rand, that 2 million rand, you're feeling it in your personality, in your personal capacity, then it really is going to change how your business works. So the action here is simple. Set quarterly targets for closing the gap by specific number of days. Track it monthly. Make it a metric that your whole business can see and understand. So be transparent about it. The gap is not a failure. It's an opportunity with a price tag on it. So that's what you have to look at here. If we can reduce this, what is the number and the amount we're going to make a difference to with actual rand values in our bank account? Looking at my number of slides versus the time, so a better vickle. Okay, so part number 4, the CEI is one of the most powerful metrics in collections. This one is the most underused. So let me show you how to read it and then what to do with that result as well. So the Collections Effectiveness Index, which is what we refer to as CEI, and it's a little bit more complicated than it looks. So let me break the formula down into a bit of plain English here. So the numerator is the beginning accounts receivable plus the credit sales during the period minus the ending total accounts receivable. So what you're measuring here is all the money that was either outstanding at the start or billed during the period, and how much did you actually collect? So you can see where we're going with that. Okay. So the denominator here is almost identical in terms of what your DSOs is, but instead of ending the total accounts receivable, you're ending with your current accounts receivable. So not total, but just your current. Okay. That is only the invoices that are not due yet. That's your current bucket. So the difference between the two numbers represents that theoretical maximum. So what you should have collected, what you did actually collect. So everything that is outstanding at the start or billed during this period minus what is legitimately not yet due at the end. Okay. So this is where you divide the first by the second and you multiply it by 100 to give us that percentage, okay? And that percentage tells you of the money that you could reasonably have collected in this period, how much actually did you collect? So if your CEI is 90%, your team collecting 90% of every rand that they theoretically could have collected is what we're looking for. If it is 60%, that means 4 out of every 10 rand that could have come in did not. Okay, so you want to see what's your percentage over there. Okay, so this is obviously the distinction I want you to hold on to is that DSO tells you how long it takes. CEI tells you how well. And you can have DSOs of 45 days and still have a poor CEI. So if your overdue accounts are not being worked on effectively, then they measure different things that you need for both. Okay. So as a benchmark, a CEI above 80% is generally considered healthy. Above 85% indicates strong collection processes, but anything below 65% is a signal that your collection function needs attention. Whether it's the process, whether it's training, whether it's resources, whether it's all three. It could even be, as I said, those soft skills as well. So that could all be an indication of where we need to put our time and our focus. And yes, for those who want to know, we will be posting this for you afterwards so that you can have these calculations and hopefully you're going to go and sit with them. And as I said, if we can support you in any way, then we definitely will do so. So, sorry, Neil, go one back. Okay, so the CEI in practice, so how we calculate the CEI, so let's talk about it and how we're going to use it. So the bands on this slide gives you the practical guide for interpreting your numbers. So as I said, 85% and above is what we would consider the benchmark as world class. And that's obviously where we want to aim to be. And so even in our own team, when we start setting our benchmarks, we're saying, right, the benchmark for the end of the year is X, or the end of the quarter is X, and we need to do certain things in those steps in order to reach that goal. Okay, so that's where you want to start working towards. And, you know, because we're talking about money, it can't obviously be at the end of the year only. It has to be maybe monthly, daily, weekly, quarterly. Okay, so what we want to see here, that if you are 85% and above, you world class. Your team is then collecting nearly everything, and they, you know, that they theoretically could. 70 to 84 is considered healthy, but there is room to improve, which is fine. And 65 to 69 is where you start asking questions, and below the 65%, you have a significant problem that needs your attention. Okay. But the bands are just the starting point. The real value of CI comes in 3 specific applications. Okay, so the first is the team benchmarking. Okay, so we need to figure out what that looks like in our industry. And most teams calculate this for the whole department. Okay, so the whole credit department. And I would encourage you to do this calculation, you know, probably per collector rather than per department. So if your overall CEI is 72%, but you find one of your team members is consistently hitting 80 to 80 and above, and another one is constantly in the 50s, you know, or 58 percentages, then it's not the same problem with the same solution. So that's something that you as a credit manager are going to want to look at. So you've got your high performers that might be doing something that you could teach to the rest of your team, where the lower performers might need training. So you know, it's not necessarily you can calculate it against the whole department, and then individuals to say, you know, I need to be able to see what skills are you lacking, and that's how I'm going to be able to do it. And then hopefully we'd be able to do what we refer to at Trade Shields as an A player, where we then bring you up to the skill level that you need to be. So that's important. The second is the monthly trend tracking. So a single month of CEI tells you, you know, where you are. In 6 months, that CEI tells you whether or not you're getting better or you're getting worse. You know, are you trending down in, you know, or are you trending up? So, and then the third thing is before and after measurements. So if you're investing in your new collection software, you change your follow-up cadence, you put your team through training, your CEI should tell you whether or not that has worked, and obviously with whom that has worked. So it's the cleanest way to measure the impact of the processes. And that's really important. So we often talk about impact here. You know, why are we doing something? What was the reason we wanted to do it? So part number 5 is the overdue percentage. Yes.
Amy, just before you carry on, let's just stick a little bit there with the collection effort.
Okay.
You can't, it goes hand in hand with your DSO. So let's say you say your DSO target is 30 days, but you're only currently collecting 75% of your outstanding ledger. You're never going to get to a DSO of 30 days. It's going to leave a huge gap that best practice DSO is not going to get any closer to your reality. So your target that you set on your collectors must first of all be real, understand what is not collectible. And what do we mean by not collectible? Those possible bad debts where you've already found out that they're in business rescue or they're in provisional liquidation or whatever the bad ones are. Or secondary, where you've got huge queries on and you're busy resolving the queries. So it's uncollectible. And that will reduce the possible collections that you have. And of course, at the same time, the possible collections, you can't leave your DSO target at 30 days and your possible collections is 65% of your outstanding ledger. You got to bring the two in line with one another and say, because we can only collect that, our expected DSO is not going to be that, our expected DSO is going to be that. So bring the whole picture together. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's have a look and see what this overdue percentage looks like. So this is probably the most widely reported metric in credit departments, and it is also one of the most misread ones as well. So here is the mistake that we see a lot of teams making. They look at the number and compare it to the target. So if overdue is below 20%, everything is fine. But if it's above 20%, then there is a problem. But by the time you hit the target threshold, you're already too late. The warning was in the movement, not in the number. Okay, so look at this chart that we've shown you here, and obviously this is just a simulation. In January, the overdue is at 11.2%. Perfectly healthy, but it's already moving in the wrong direction. By February, that 11.8% is at 11.8%. By March, it's at 12.4%. So each individual month-on-month movement looks very, very small, but alarming in isolation. By July, that healthy 11% has become 18.8%, and it is still trending upwards. So if you've ever, been watching the trend rather than the number, then you would have flagged this in February already and taken action in March instead of, a team watching only that little threshold number that might still be debating whether or not it's actually a real problem. And here's the rule I would give you. So 2 consecutive monthly increases in overdue percentage is an amber flag. Okay, or you can make it whatever color you want. This tells you to look at it more carefully and increase your collections activities. So 3 consecutive increases is what I would refer to as a red flag. Okay, and not a trend to monitor by the situation, but to act immediately. So it's not let's wait and see what happens next month. No, we're going to do it now. Okay, so the other thing I want you to notice is the overdue percentage in this portfolio, the portfolio level metric. So when it moves, your first question should be, is this concentrated in a few large accounts, or is this spread across the book? If 3 large accounts are dragging that number up, that is a very different problem from your general deterioration over your 50 accounts. So the segmentation tells you where to focus as well. And as I said, you may also know that larger businesses have longer payment terms, and that could be an indication, or do we have a bigger problem? So the last area we want to look at is arguably the most practical one. So I know that we only have 2 minutes left, and we have popped our what's the word I'm looking for? The poll for you to rate our session, and also for you to give us your feedback. So before you jump on off, if you wouldn't mind just completing that for us. So here we get to the next slide, which is the KPI triggered escalation. Okay, and this table is designed to be practical, so you should be able to print it out and to pin it next to your computer if you want. So for each of the 5 KPIs we've covered today, there are the 3 zones: green meaning your performance is healthy and in range and your current process is working, so keep doing what you're doing. The amber means that you need to watch your territory, so you need to know not to panic yet, but you need to increase your monitoring and your frequency and ask why the number is moving in the wrong direction. And red means you need to act today, not tomorrow. So let me give you a specific example of how this works in practice. So imagine today is the first Monday of the month. So it would have been, or the first day of the month, which was yesterday. You pull your metrics. Your CEI is at 62%. This is what we refer to as red, if you remember from before. Overdue is 20%. That is amber, but getting close to red. DSO is 16% above the best possible, meaning amber. And your trend shows you overdue has increased for 3 consecutive months, red. So now we're seeing that trend. Okay, so what does this picture tells you? It tells you that your collection process has a significant problem. And again, we want to see where in that collections process. Is it an individual or is it a team problem? Okay, and so we want to then look at the overall book that is deteriorating. That is not just metrics that we need to review, but an actual conversation. So this is a business problem and a business conversation that needs to take place. Okay, so that's what we're showing you here. And again, we're going to give this to you and pop it for you afterwards into the chat so you can print this out for yourselves. Okay, yes, go for it. Neil's yes, Neil just said they can't hear me in the chat, but he did say that there is a question in the chat. So it says, thank you, very well received. What is the best way to calculate the cost of financing or opportunity of lost interest from interest pertaining to, sorry, something popped up, pertaining to overdue DSOs? Okay, so what we can do for you, yes, go for it, Martin.
It's in short, very short. You already said it. So if your DSO, best DSO that you can have is 30 days, because that's what your terms are, and currently your DSO is standing on 15 days, so you've got 15 days worth of capital lying somewhere else. That's overdue capital. So if one day is 1 million, it means you've got 15 million tied up there. And let's say the interest on 1 million per day is 100 Rand. So that's 1,500 Rands worth of interest per day that you are losing or that you could gain. So that's the simplest, most easiest calculation. So 15 million times 15 could mean that's how much interest you could be paying on capital out there, or which you could be earning on capital in your account, depending on, of course, the interest rate that you are enjoying with your bank.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, so now we have our last slide, and I know we are 2 minutes over time, so if you need to drop off, please do so. This is really just something that we wanted to give you, which is everything that we've covered today on one slide. So the credit cycle mapped neatly into a set of KPIs. So when you look at it from this perspective, it now becomes clear, or hopefully it's clear, that you do not need to measure everything at every single stage, but you need to measure the right thing at the right moment. And so that's really what we wanted for you today, to show you hopefully the entire KPI map. And as I said before, we are always available to have this conversation with you and work with your teams and make sure that we are here to assist you to see how can we reduce your DSOs and help you calculate where the problems lie. And obviously, maybe if you are a trade shield user, then hopefully that you're seeing these trends within your platform as well as early indicators. But as usual, we just want to thank you always for your time and for your effort. And I see Martin has something he does want to say. I'll come to you in a second.
Well, there's a statement.
There's another question. A follow-on from the last one. Yeah. So it said, but is this one-sided? What about settlement discounts, which brings the cost dimensions to lower your DSOs?
What about settlement discounts? Which brings a cost dimension. So remember that what I always say, you've got margin, and the minute you start giving settlement discount, it reduces your margin, the cost of it. So if you bringing your down, if you want to artificially reduce your DSO by giving settlement discount, in other words, having that little carrot, is going to cost you. And what is it going to cost you? So if your margin is 3%, you can't go and give 5% settlement discount, because you're going to then give away 2% more than what you actually were going to make. So be very careful when you start playing in that field as well. So that's where your cost for your settlement discount goes, straight against the margin. It hits the margin immediately. Doesn't wait. It says you are now giving your product away cheaper. Remember, there's two discounts. Trade discount. I want to sell you a cell phone, normal price 10 Rand. But if you take 20, I'll give them to you 9 Rand 50. That's trade discount. Now I've already sold them to you, and I say, okay, if you pay me earlier, I'll give them to you at an even better price. That's called settlement discount. Two different types of discount. One you already know about because it's in the invoice. You've already sold it. You know what your margin is. The other one's going to eat your margin later, collect your money earlier. So now we're over time, and I say au revoir.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will post the recording for you as well as the slides, so you can keep that as a reference. And we will see you if you're a Trade Shield user on Tuesday, and if you are not a Trade Shield user on Thursday. Oh, and we didn't even mention, if you are a Trade Shield user, you should see a new product that we've just launched, which is document storage. So have a look at that pop up and our little link so you can see what that says. Have a great day.
Thank you, Amy. Brilliant job
Thanks,
as
Martin.
usual.
Are sitting our very exciting